Hey y'all, this is Tamika, the face behind Hey HR, and today we're going to talk about something that I think really confuses people from time to time, and that's the difference between an HR specialist or an HR generalist. If it doesn't confuse folks really wonder, like, after I become an HR specialist, do I go straight into being an HR generalist? So what I'm going to do is tell you the difference between these two positions to help make it just a little bit easier for you. So if you want to know the difference between an HR specialist and an HR generalist, just keep on watching. So I've already done a dedicated video on an HR specialist and what that role entails, like in pretty good detail. And I've also done a video all on an HR generalist and what a day in the life is like for an HR generalist. So I'll put both of the links to those videos below. But I'm just going to dive into the differences between these two without really going over what each of those positions are and what they do independently, but how they differ together. So an HR generalist works on everything in the entire employee life cycle. That means they can work on recruiting, they can work on sourcing or finding candidates before they recruit them, they can do the interviewing, they can do onboarding, they can do pre-screenings, they can do everything that goes all the way up to resignation or termination separation. So that includes benefits, that includes employee relations, that includes performance management, that includes trainings, that includes open enrollment or benefits and qualifying events. So they can literally do anything that's in the HR umbrella that an employee would need through the employee's entire career with that company. So the employee life cycle is from beginning to end. Beginning is normally sourcing, attracting, finding, interviewing, and hiring. And then the end is resignation, termination, separation, whichever that is, right? So in between, we always got issues going on. HR generalists can do everything in there. Now, HR specialist is a little bit different. They really hone in on one thing and they do that repetitively. An HR specialist can be someone that assists the HR generalist on specific tasks that may become very, very time consuming for the HR generalist. That's just like repetitive transactional tasks that really doesn't take a ton of thought. Then that's for our entry level HR specialist. I'll tell you a little bit more about someone who's more graduated as an HR specialist. But that's the difference, is that an HR specialist is gonna focus in on one thing. An HR generalist is a catch-all. Anything HR, we grab it. I just can't imagine a better role that would get you prepared to be an HR manager, an HR director, some type of leader where you're managing an HR team than the HR generalist position. In my opinion, the HR specialist position is one that you can tap on in a couple parts of your career, but it doesn't necessarily get you prepared to be a manager. And most people aren't equipped with knowing all things. Because when you're being like an HR manager, the plan is that you're managing the entire HR department or entire business unit. And as an HR specialist, you really only focusing on one thing repetitively. So other things you're just not familiar with. So an HR generalist position really gets you kind of graduated up that career ladder to being an HR specialist leading an HR department. Now, HR specialist is a good position that can totally get you prepared to be an HR generalist because you've done parts of being an HR generalist. Now it's time for you to acclimate on the other parts, get acclimated on the other parts, and to become more seasoned with the holistic view of HR being an HR generalist. It definitely is a helpful career path or a helpful job to have in your HR career to get you prepared to be a generalist. In some cases, you could be doing a step up into your career by saying, okay, I'm gonna leave from a specialist to be a generalist. In some roles, you can be doing a step down in your career where you're like, I've been a seasoned HR specialist, now I'm going back to being a generalist. Typically, people see an HR generalist role as a more senior role. And I think that the reason we see it that way is one is a catch-all role. This person knows any and everything that somebody can toss their way. And most times they're the first point of contact for the HR department. Definitely one that is seen as more senior, but it depends on what type of HR specialist you are if the salary is more senior. So if you're an entry-level HR specialist, then you're really assisting someone with something in the HR department. So you can be assisting the HR department as a whole as an HR specialist. You can be assisting the payroll processes. You could be assisting the HRS or the technology we use in HR. You could be assisting recruiting. Like those are like more of like kind of your entry level. And I'll take the technology one out. So the technology one's not necessarily entry level. But if you want to be a senior level HR specialist, then we'll talk about the technology side. Because depending on what you're doing in that technology, you can be really, really seasoned. You can be an employee relations specialist. That's more senior level HR specialist position. You can be a senior talent acquisition specialist. That's more senior than an HR generalist. when we talk about compensation, when we talk about the way that you're managing those tasks. HR generalists are going to handle everything on a regular basis, but HR specialists, a senior HR specialist, is really not only going to handle doing that every day, but they're going to analyze it. They're going to pull data. They're going to train others on it. They're going to create new processes, new policies. They're going to really clean it up and be more strategic, as well as the transactional things. Now, this really gives you guys good insight into the salary part of things. So let's talk about the salary a bit. I pulled this data for the HR generalist salary from PayScale, and PayScale says that the average is $58,120 per year. And so that range makes it from $44,000 a year to $75,000 a year. That's primarily because I pulled it for South Carolinians and I'm in the US. So that's US dollars, and even more niche down to South Carolina, which is a state that doesn't cost as much money as, or the cost of living isn't as high as New York or California. So obviously the salary ranges, or the average, may be a little bit lower. But the salary range for HR specialists is super duper wide. And this is why I wanted to really give you guys the difference, because we get so confused. An HR specialist can be an entry-level role or a very senior role. As a result, the salary range is very, very wide. So the salary range on average is $78,591. I got this information from Built-In, and it's not focused on South Carolina, it's focused on the US. So the average that Built-In is saying is $50,000 per year as the minimum and $200,000 per year as the maximum. You're like, Tamika, that range way too off. No, it's not, because it's from the minimum or entry-level HR specialist position all the way to a graduated senior-level HR specialist. And there are HR specialists that's in a comfortable six figures. You can be an HR specialist at different parts in your career. Don't say,
oh, well, I was an HR specialist and I help with recruiting, so now I can be an employee relations specialist, right?
No.
Most times when you look at a senior level HR specialist position, it doesn't just require having a SHRM or HRCI certification. Most times you need additional certifications. So when we talk about compensation, payroll, there are additional certifications that they get along with HRCI and SHRM. Explains the high salary, right? So don't get it confused. I really am happy that I did this video, because I feel like on the previous video when I talked about HR specialists, I just kept it focused on like entry-level HR specialist positions, and I really didn't break down the difference between the entry level and the senior level. I don't know why I didn't do that, because at the time that I did that video, I was a senior talent acquisition specialist, but I didn't look at that video before I did it either, before I did this one. I was just thinking, gosh, I don't think I really differentiated a lot between the like an entry-level HR specialist and a senior level one. I have tons of resources here, because I don't want you guys to rely on one thing. And another thing is, I've created so many resources, like it makes me feel like I'm not making all of my information available to you or putting it in your hands, because I get a lot of the same questions. So I want to help you out with these questions, because I can guarantee you, before you put like a question, your immediate first question in the comment section, you're probably going to find it in some of these resources. So I made an HR generalist specific video, which I already told you guys about at the beginning of this video. I already made an HR specialist video, which I told you guys about at the beginning of this video. But I also did a blog, and that blog talk about mid-level careers and entry-level careers. And so that really goes into the different types of positions that are considered entry-level and that are considered mid-level and even that are considered senior-level in the HR career field. And so I'll put the links to those below, because they really go into a more like deep dive of a good comparison of not just one or two positions, but multiple. And then I also did a blog that tells you on how, or I'll say the best ways to determine your salary. So if you're like, Tamika, how you got that salary information? I go through and break it down for you, how to find your minimum. What should you go in at? You don't have to ask Tamika, how much should I look for? That blog tells you exactly how. And then I tell you resources so you can find the salary range that works best for you. So I gave you 3 different resources, right? And in those resources, you can pull the salary range for all of those and just give yourself a nice band between those 3 resources and make sure it's above your minimum. So I hope that wasn't too confusing. I'll definitely put the link to all of these resources down in the description box, because this can really get you geared up. As a heads up, just so y'all know, like my videos and my plan for my videos are to be more senior level. I feel like I have really hit on a lot of entry level stuff, and I've left my senior level people kind of hanging out there. And so we want to talk more about the intricate details of being an HR professional from your first, second year on up to your 10th 20th year of being an HR professional. I've talked a lot in so many videos about how to start your career, where to get started, what you should do in your resume, what you should do in the interviews. Now we want to talk about what it's like on an everyday working life. So that's why I looked at these resources and I was like, yeah, girl, it's time to graduate on. Another thing that I did was a freebie, absolute